Caleb is a coalition of churches, nonprofits, labor unions, civic organizations that come together around common issues in order to build power for change. I mean, that's really the short of it.
Especially in action. I think, faith without works is dead. And then equality of seeing that everyone has a seat at the table. And then also love. Without love, we won't be able to do anything, or nothing will be fruitful of what we do. And then benevolence is the kindness, just showing kindness in a mean world, I think speaks volume, as well as there are so many people that have it in their heart that they want to do something, but don't know how to do it, or where to do it, or how to get involved. And so right now, what Caleb is at the right moment is because we're just a reflection of allowing people to see that it can no longer happen on our watch. I think that the time of change is always now. There's never a period where we can wait for justice to come. We're going to have to make it come. I think that the time is right now because we have so many committed and dedicated people that have sacrificed their time to say, I want to be involved. Not just speak of what they want to do, but actually put their heart and their soul and their monies behind it. And I think that's what has helped us. When you have dedicated people, when you have committed people, when you have people that have found their passion, that's what has made the difference. We have been able to connect people that have found their passion. They have found their voice, and they are using it.
Welcome to the Develop With Us campaign launch. My name is Lanisha Lake. I am the co-chair for the economic mobility team. So what is this campaign about? Well, do you want to see positive change in your community, but are concerned about the impacts of development on you and your neighbors? Have you ever wondered how and why tax breaks are given to some companies and not others? Do you feel your voice doesn't matter anyway? Us too. We are members of Caleb's Economic Mobility Task Force. Over a year ago, our team began meeting to discuss what issues were deeply important to us and how we could make an impact. As we talked to other Caleb members, neighbors, and family, one thing kept coming up. We saw development happening all around us and big money coming to town. But we also saw that generally it wasn't benefiting everyday people in our communities. As this happened, we realized we rarely knew who to ask for and who to go to have a voice in these decisions. We wondered whether or not we actually have a voice in our city. What is the blueprint for success in Chattanooga? Economic mobility is a big topic, but at the root of the issue are the processes and the systems that help make sure that economic development is accountable and transparent to working people. So here's where we decided to focus, and that's why we're here tonight. And here's Austin with our agenda.
Thanks, Lanisha. My name is Austin Sauerbrei, and I'm the other co-chair for the Economic Mobility Task Force of Caleb. And yeah, we are so glad that y'all are here today. And I'm just going to give y'all a quick snippet of what's in store over the next 40 minutes or so. So I'm going to hand it off to Janice in just a minute to talk about our task force values. So what's really deeply driving the work that we're doing. And then after that, I'm going to hand it over to Rob and Joe and Stefan to give us a little bit of a understanding of the economic landscape. So really understanding where our economy's at and what folks in our communities, our neighbors are dealing with on a day-to-day basis and how the economy impacts them. And then after that, we're going to dive into really why we're here tonight, which is discussing tax incentives and the money that we give out to promote development in the city. And we want to get a little bit of a better understanding of how that process works, who makes those decisions. Then after that, we're going to go over, from our research and our conversations, the work we've been doing over the past year, what we understand is some of the gaps and things that our city could be doing a little bit better on that front. And then we're going to end with a call to action. At Caleb, we believe that real change happens from everyday people coming together and having a unified voice. And so we're going to give folks something concrete in a way that you can get involved in the campaign. So we are so glad you're here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Janice to talk about some of our campaign values.
So there's a lot to discuss tonight, and there's a lot to learn. But we, the Economic Mobility Task Force, have come up with 3 major values. What does good development look like? Well, 1, living wage. No one should have to work more than 1 full-time job to provide for themselves or their family. And the second one is community stability. Investment should increase opportunity and quality of life for low and moderate income families. Every Chattanoogan deserves secure housing in a safe, thriving community. And our third value is equitable transit. When people have access to safe, affordable public transit, they're able to get to their jobs and their training and education, which are pathways to economic sustainability. And what else are we looking for? We want transparency and community voice in decisions involving public money that will impact our neighborhoods. And we want accountability, community-centered metrics that ensure that companies who get public resources are actually benefiting us. So what? Good development happens. How does it happen? With us, not to us. Thank you. And Rob is going to tell you some more.
We may all know some of the story about Chattanooga's history of charting a new course in the economy from when we were in post-industrial depression. And there is no more shining example of that than the 21st century waterfront and the building of a tourism economy here, because the turnaround for this city has always been led by major public investments. The 21st century waterfront was a $120 million project. It was completed in 2005. To make it happen, half of that total amount was paid for with city bonds, with a new revenue stream, a whole new tax system put in on hotel rooms, so that tourists coming to appreciate this new sector of the economy here would pay for the quality of life improvements. And also, on the county side, would fund a public agency to promote tourism to Chattanooga. That's the Chattanooga Tourism Company, formerly known as the Convention and Visitors Bureau, that would grow that part of the economy, support those jobs, and improve quality of life for all of the rest of us. So it's possible. There's no reason not to have great imagination. And that is what made our revival as a manufacturing center possible. And that's what we're going to be talking about most of tonight.
Good evening. Thanks, Rob. Well, so part of what you've just heard is public planning and investment, and that has also been a very important part of historical industry developments that we've had in recent years, such as Volkswagen, but also in future industries that we're building right now, including our tech economy. So just a quick look here. In 2008, we recruited Volkswagen, and approximately 16.6 million in local public funds and tax breaks have been provided per year. And over a total, that's going to be a total of nearly $500 million overall. Further, with EPB, the public has invested quite a lot there, and through the Enterprise Center and its Innovation District, we've invested millions to provide for a smart city future. But despite all the great planning, there's a lot that Chattanooga is actually leaving behind a lot of its citizens. Economic growth has been great for some of us, but there's a majority that are still struggling, even during good times. So one of the things that might be surprising to some is that our actual business and economic growth here in Chattanooga, our total goods and services that we produced, was actually 9% lower per year than the national average, which is quite something for a city that takes such pride in its business community. In fact, last year, the actual GDP was 20% lower than the national average. We also find some problems in how this affects families too, and the numbers are pretty grim. 12.9% of Chattanooga's families live below the poverty threshold as of 2019, which is remarkable. That's nearly 36% higher than the national average in the United States. Chattanooga's themselves, they earn 17% less than the average American in basic income. They're 17% poorer than the average US citizen, which is amazing. And not only that, our income is actually growing at a slower rate, 20% slower than the average US person. So what would it really take to have a living wage? One way that we know is through the MIT's living wage calculator. They've done a lot of the hard work to factor in the basic living costs as they are here in our city. So that's food, housing, medical care, child care, just the very basics to live. That doesn't include college. It doesn't include money for retirement or vacation. But with just that alone, we see that an individual with one child, one working individual, that they would need $22.63 an hour as a subsistence wage, and for one person taking care of a family of four on a single income, they would need $24.18 an hour. So beyond just the economic numbers, beyond the pocketbook, we all know and we've all heard from Anthony Fauci and through our health professionals that all these things, they end up taking a toll on us physically and mentally, with broken families and communities. A couple of stats I have here for you is that Chattanoogaans on average have 1.1 years less life expectancy than the average US person. We have 15% more physical and mental health sick days per month than the average person. And back in 2016, which were some of the more recent data points that we had roughly double the amount of violent crime and the amount of homicides here in our city, which is just tragic. Finally, we know that a lot of these things are even more pronounced for the African American community, who suffer illness and mortality at a higher rate, in infant mortality in particular, where they have a 2.5 times greater infant mortality rate than white Chattanoogans. On to Stefan.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So how do we ensure, we're maximizing the value of our public funds so that all Chattanoogans can participate in a future of shared prosperity? As we've said, we're here to highlight the importance of decision-making for publicly funded developments in Chattanooga and asking that these decisions be made with us, not to us. Our Develop With Us campaign started with us asking Chattanoogans questions about how they understood the important development decisions being made across our communities.
If you could change one thing about Chattanooga, what would you change?
The whole city.
What do you think about the way your neighborhood community is changing?
It's changing for the better, but it's really changing for the worse.
Well, I've seen it develop. I've seen a lot of areas develop and look really nice, but I've also seen some areas that need developing that have kind of been thrown to the wayside.
Do you have a grasp of sort of how decisions are made, or what do you know about the way decisions are made about how development happens? And this isn't a trick question. Whatever you know or don't know is fine.
Probably, mostly city council and the mayor. I'd say they're planning, plan stuff out. So I guess that's mostly how it gets made. Decision gets made.
Okay.
The city council people mostly listen to maybe 2 or 3 people in the neighborhood and count them as everybody.
Do you feel like you or your neighbors have a say in the decisions made about your neighborhood, like where things are going, new things developing?
This is a good question. I would say I don't think so. I think this is actually a good initiative, because if it's informing of you before a decision's made, I think that's smart.
When we find out something, it's already done. They haven't came to us as owners and homeowners and business owners and property owners. They haven't came to us and asked us nothing, advice or go to any meetings or any of that.
But if you're not in that clique, or you don't have people that educate you on what's going on, or you're not part of it, then you're going to be left behind.
You might not like the truth, but I'm going to tell you the truth. This is not right. What's going on right now is not right. And people know it's not right, and they don't want to say anything because they're afraid, it's going to cause some confusion. Well, guess what? Cause a little confusion to get some things right.
This is what we want to see happen about the neighborhood.
I would ask, who are the people that's behind making the decisions, and why they can't come to us and ask us about our opinion, what's going to happen here by us being here all these years. I would love to be a part of that. I would like them to let me know, who are these people? Is it the city? Is it the mayor? Is it who? It's not fair for us not knowing until it's done happen.
Do you think your neighbors feel that way too?
Yes, I do. I really do.
The community took note. They sat up and said, people are noticing us. How do we feel about this? And they just, they made their own changes. That's the miracle that has happened in my community.
It's so grateful to be a part of it, and so I'm looking forward to it. The very best is yet to come.
So as you can see, in talking with folks in the community, that question around who makes decisions for us is central. And so economic mobility is obviously a huge, huge issue, and it's infinitely complex, and we recognize that. But as a task force, we really wanted to, again, zone in on one aspect of that issue that we could really take hold of and make an impact in. And so what we're really going to focus on is unpacking how corporate tax breaks and incentive deals work in the city. And some of the questions that continue to come up over and over in our process when we were trying to understand how tax breaks worked was, what's the real magnitude of tax breaks in terms of real dollars? How much money are we giving out to these companies? How does do tax breaks work? Who decides which companies receive a tax break and which one doesn't? How do we make sure that these decisions actually improve our health, wages, financial security, and life circumstances? And most importantly, where do you and I and our neighbors and our family fit into that process? Where is our voice heard? Turn it over to Janice.
Thank you, Austin. So just last year, the amount of corporate property taxes forgiven by City of Chattanooga and Hamilton County totaled 25 million plus. Typical agreement for these companies lasts 10 years or 20 years, maybe 30 years. So now we're looking at 25 million over 10 or 20 or 30 years. And 25 million is 1 year. If collected, these taxes could be used to fund things like infrastructure, public safety, and parks, libraries, and neighborhood services, youth and family services, affordable housing, and other essential services.
And so in this process, as we began to research that 25 million figure, over 90% of that was given through a type of tax break called the Jobs Pilot Program. So what is a jobs pilot, and why does it matter to you and I? Well, pilot stands for payment in lieu of taxes. And basically it's just an agreement between the city and a given company that provides that company with a property tax break over a period of time. And as Janice mentioned, it could be 10 years, 20 years, up to 30 years. And ideally, the purpose behind it is to use that tax break as an incentive to bring companies to the city that might not otherwise come to the city. That's the intent. And so jobs pilots and other incentive deals aren't inherently bad. We're not against tax incentives and tax breaks writ large, but we do feel like we want to know a few things first. Do they create real concrete benefit for folks in our communities? Is it worth what we would lose in property tax revenue? All those things that Janice was talking about? Is the tax deal bringing this company worth losing that tax revenue? And lastly, would the company locate here anyway? And Helen will go into this in a bit, but would the company locate here without the tax break? And so with that, we want to understand what the current process for making decisions about job pilots are, and does it actually answer those questions? And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Helen to walk us through the process of decision making for pilots.
Thank you, Austin. So the first question might be, what does a company do if they want to get a pilot? And they're basically the early steps are they go to the Chamber of Commerce, because the city and county have outsourced our economic development program to the chamber and pay them about 1.2 million a year for this. Secondly, the company is asked to fill out a short application form. And then third, the chamber reviews the application. Now this is where it sort of gets interesting, because even though we have delegated this to the chamber, our elected officials haven't provided the chamber with criteria or policies to guide them in deciding what projects to bring forward or what the terms of the pilot agreements should be. There's sometimes been a reference to the chamber's black box. We don't know what's in that black box, but we would like to believe that, and I believe they do, look at things like the number of jobs and investment and wages to some degree, maybe not significantly enough. So we talk about how we don't have criteria and we don't have policies. So let's talk a little bit about what some of those might be. I think the primary things that we want to look at in terms of, sort of getting in the door, if someone wants a tax break, is that we put the burden on them to demonstrate that they are providing significant public benefit. And the kind of things you look at, yes, you look at number of jobs, but you certainly look at wages, you look at investment, you look at whether or not a company that wanted to locate, let's say, might be a catalyst project. Volkswagen certainly has been a catalyst project in bringing other auto-related industries to Chattanooga. So that's an example of a significant public benefit. The other, I think, threshold criteria needs to be would the company be here anyway? Because the ideal is we want jobs, we want good jobs, well-paying jobs, we want the investment, but we also want these companies to pay their fair share of taxes. So this relates to what sometimes is called the but-for test. But for the incentive, would they be here anyway? And when you look at the list of companies currently that have tax breaks, you kind of scratch your head because you kind of think, you know, they probably would have located here or certainly would have expanded here even without the pilot. But if they ask, we seem to have difficulty saying no, because I think there's a perception that that would mean that we're against jobs, and certainly we're not against jobs, but we need to make sure we're being good stewards of public dollars here. So meanwhile, back to the process. We talked about criteria, but we also need to have policies in place, and policies might relate to things like the paying living wages, good clawback language that would spell out if a company doesn't meet its commitments, what the consequences of that might be, and making abundantly clear that every company needs to pay their school taxes in full. So meanwhile, back to the process, when something goes forward to the City Council and County Commission, the Chamber has reviewed the application. The Chamber apparently works closely with the city and the county mayors, and they decide what projects to bring forward. We don't know, as I said, what their criteria are, but they bring these forward to the City Council and the County Commission. But there's no written staff report there, and there's no public hearing. So the chamber and the business are allowed, and city staff are allowed unlimited time to be advocates for the project. But there's no opportunity for any member of the public to ask questions. And certainly sometimes we might want to be there speaking in support, because as Austin said, we don't think that all tax incentives are inherently bad, but we think we need to be more strategic in granting them. Then after it gets through the county, City Council and County Commission, then it goes to a body called the Industrial Development Board. We have a city and a county IDB, and the IDBs basically were created because they are tax exempt. And so what they do once the city and county elected officials authorize this is that they take ownership of the property and enter into a payment in lieu of tax agreement. And so that way the business takes advantage of their tax exempt status, since technically they're owned by the IDB, but the IDB then leases these back to the companies for a nominal amount, $1 or whatever. So they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think a map with lots of colors on it may be worth even more than that. Maybe it's worth $1 million here. This is a map basically just to give you an idea of kind of where we are today, and I think this should influence, you know, it should convince us we really do need to be careful in granting future tax breaks, because everything you see in any kind of color here is not paying their full share of property taxes. What you see in yellow, these are government-owned properties. What you see in orange, there's some nonprofits like hospitals or private schools or whatever. And then what you see in green are pilots, and red, that's the Black Creek TIF in the lower left-hand corner. And we need to add the MLK TIF and the Tubman TIF, which were fairly recently approved. So this, I think, you know, gives us pause, and I would dare say that most of us live in a place that isn't under a color. So we're paying our full share of taxes. So in essence, we've sort of created a system where some of the companies with the most ability to pay are not paying very much of anything, and then those of us in some of these denser neighborhoods are paying, in essence, to help, you know, subsidize these corporate folks. So anyway, it just seems like that we need to be more strategic. We need to look at significant public benefit, and we definitely need to look at the but-for test to make sure they need that. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he's going to talk about barriers to accountability and transparency.
Thank you, Helen. And Helen and the other presenters have already talked about a lot of these, but we're going to recapitulate them here. So first off, we have a process for establishing and approving these pilots and tax incentives that is very murky, to say the least. The current culture is geared toward these closed door talks with business, the Chamber of Commerce, and the mayor's office. And there's only a very short interval for city boards or the city council, and let alone citizens, to become educated about the pilot, what the proposed benefits are, and to weigh it in their minds before a vote is held. There's very little detailed written information about the proposed economic outcomes provided to elected officials or the public. And in general, there's a lack of education around how pilots and tax money are supposed to serve the community. So we need a transparent process and a plan with concrete cost-benefit analyses, public forums where proposals can be discussed and weighed against the anticipated loss of public resources from a tax break that, as Janice said, can last 10, 20, 30 years. The second barrier is a culture of unquestioning approval for pilots. There are currently no set criteria, as Helen pointed out, for whether a jobs pilot is actually needed or whether the project will result in good living wage jobs for Chattanoogans. Proposals come to the council, which are our direct representatives in city government, after the chamber and the mayor have already blessed the project. And this places our council people and the IDB members in a difficult political position. If they have questions, there's already a sense that these things are accomplished and that any questioning or more robust interrogation about the standards for these pilots is some kind of stonewalling of progress. But since pilots began to be approved by the city, it's hard to find even one elected official or board member who has voted against a proposed pilot. And most of the time, they've scarcely been questioned. That is the kind of rubber stamp culture that we need to move away from. We need a culture of skepticism and robust debate around these tax breaks. And most importantly, we need concrete, non-negotiable criteria for jobs pilots with robust clawback provisions included in the contract that will ensure new proposals have at least a floor of community benefits, which we can depart from. Finally, we have a narrow vision of the sort of business friendliness that these pilots represent. Though each individual pilot may have beneficial impacts that are easy to tout, the aggregate toll, as you saw from that map, especially, the aggregate toll on city resources is never considered. If we're giving away bad or mediocre or not very significant tax breaks that don't represent a significant improvement now, that makes it much more difficult to give away tax breaks later that would actually provide much larger concrete benefits. You saw from that map, the base that we are drawing our public funds from is already drastically reduced from tax breaks in the past. And the standards up to this point have been so low that even projects that are, suspect according to the criteria that we'd like to lay out, that Helen sort of started moving towards, even these very suspect projects can claim credibly to be an improvement. And as Joe pointed out, the economic picture that's put forward by the city's public relations is not quite as rosy as you might have been led to believe. So we need a comprehensive long-term plan put together in collaboration with communities with clear goalposts that fits these pilots and other tax incentives into a plan for Chattanooga with ample public funds that is prosperous, not just for a few, but is actually moving toward greater economic equity in wages and transportation, and in which stable communities can flourish on their own terms. Which brings us back to Janice.
So yes, let's recap. With all this information that my task force members and colleagues have presented, what does good development look like? As we've referenced several times, a living wage. We should be able to live on what we make. And then community stability. Investment should increase opportunity and quality of life. And then equitable transit. We should be able to have affordable and safe transit to get to jobs and training and all of the things that we need to do with education. Again, to continue the recap, what do we want? Transparency. I know you've heard that all through this, but that's what we need. And a community voice in these decisions and accountability so that companies who come will and use the public resources are actually benefiting the community. Again, one more time, good development happens with us, not to us.
Now, this is all to do with the long-term structure of our economy and how we can do better, but we can't not address the crisis that we are in right now. You might have seen this map recently from the COVID tracking project having to add a new color. By this measure, which is people testing positive for COVID-19 per capita, Tennessee's outbreak is now the worst in the world. So everybody stay safe. And remember, as I'm sure you understand, this is not just a public health crisis. This is a humanitarian and economic crisis that it will take us years to recover from. And that is why we need this kind of strategy and safeguarding of what resources we have. This is some of what that toll has looked like over the course of the year. As you can see on the left, in broad income categories, the people who are already earning the lowest wages have been the most likely to lose their jobs and will be the least, we'll see the fewest jobs regained if we do go into recovery. On the right, you can see how it's those same people who are not able to cut back on spending because we're already at bare bones. So again, when we think about recovery from this current crisis, it needs to include this kind of strategy for how we use public resources, public investment to build a new economy on the other side. And so thank you for being a part of this conversation with Caleb.
Yeah, so what are we ultimately trying to accomplish here? You know, what is this all kind of boiled down to? You know, we've outlined the important roles that job pilots play in Chattanooga's development for all, and we've seen the shortfalls of the current process. So we are firstly asking mayoral and city council candidates for their commitment to develop and implement clear, enforceable, and publicly accessible criteria for job pilots.
Our second ask for the 2021 candidates is, will you commit to provide city council, relevant boards, and the general public thorough written information outlining exactly how a proposed tax break will benefit the community? Will you ensure that this information is provided well ahead of time, well ahead of any vote on a pilot, TIF, or other forms of public incentive?
We also have a few other key asks to encourage our overall goal of transparency and accountability in decision making. The first being public hearings. Will you support an effort to require relevant boards like the IDB and HEB and city council to hold public hearings for respective pilot proposals? Secondly, we're asking about community-based board appointees. Will you work with Caleb to help identify and set clear expectations for appointees to the IDB and HEB boards?
It's on mute. As we wrap up tonight, just want to thank everybody so much for being here. It really means a lot that we're engaging as a public and learning about these issues, but we don't want to stop just at learning about the issues. We definitely want to make sure we know how the process works, but at Caleb, we believe in taking action and taking action together as a community. And taking action together as a community is how we get things done and how we shift and change our city. So what you can do immediately right now is we're about to put a link in the chat box and sign our campaign letter to the candidates, which goes through each of those asks. And what we're going to do is we want to get signatures to this letter and actually let the candidates know that the public supports these asks. And so please sign on to that. Also on that form, there's going to be an option if you want to be more involved with this campaign, get involved with future trainings, future events that we're doing, want to be involved in the planning, we'd love to have you. So we'd love to hear from you on that. And then the last thing, in the end of January and early February, before we get to early voting, we're going to host a series of city council and mayoral forums where we're going to be sharing this information directly with the 2021 candidates and hearing what they have to say and asking for their commitments on those asks. And we would love for you, your family, your friends, your neighbors to jump on and join those calls and hear what the candidates have to say. So with that, we really appreciate each and every one of you being on this call, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon. And if our presenters could stick on the line, that'd be great.